If you were asked the question, who is the most influential writer of the 20th century? The name Gilbert Keith Chesterton probably wouldn't rise above Tolkien, Lewis, or George Bernard Shaw. But each one of those men claimed Chesterton as a valuable friend and fearless defender of the Christian faith. In this month of history, one of the most prolific Christian authors and thinkers, GK Chesterton, was born in London in 1874. Growing up, Chesterton was fascinated with art and storytelling, and from a young age, he desired to turn his love for art into an occupation. While he never achieved his goal as an artist, he went on to later impact some of the greatest storytellers in history, including C.S. Lewis, H.G. Wells, and T.S. Eliot.
At the turn of the 20th century, just like Charles Spurgeon had predicted, Europe was rocketing towards rationalist thought and the rejection of a supreme being. Victorian England at the turn of the century was fascinated with the occult. The so-called New Age was a seductive lure for those who wanted to rebel against traditional religious systems. Seances were commonplace amongst the educated classes, and connecting with spirit energies was all the rage as Chesterton was coming of age. Chesterton grew up curious about life and all things spiritual. As a young man without any strong religious ties, Chesterton became fascinated with the occult and other supernatural phenomena. In his own words, he described an experience he once had with a Ouija board. He recalled, "I would not altogether rule out the suggestion of some, that we were playing with fire, or even with hellfire." As the spiritualist and New Age movement swept through Western philosophy and religion, Chesterton struggled to determine his path in life.
After high school, Chesterton never went to college. His big break came when in 1900 he was asked to contribute a few magazine articles on art criticism. Those few articles launched his career, and he would eventually become one of the most prolific writers of all time. His style is unmistakable, always marked with humility, consistency, paradox, wit, and wonder. Chesterton used his unorthodox literary style to explain truths inside complex matters of politics and faith. He was known for taking a concept and flipping it inside out, providing different perspectives that would confound the greatest critical thinkers of all time.
T.S. Eliot wrote about his use of paradox, saying he concealed the most serious and revolutionary designs, concealing them by exposure. According to his contemporaries, Chesterton was a master of the English language and could write about anything and everything, which he did. Chesterton would not only be a great defender of faith against the turn-of-the-century new agnostic ideas, but go on to inspire the likes of C.S. Lewis, Ernest Hemingway, and even Gandhi. While Chesterton's writings are considered some of the most profound of the 20th century, he was also widely known for his abilities to cover and debate multiple genres and topics in writing. He would make a name for himself covering political and social subjects. But what made him famous was his ability to cross the aisle and debate those who he did not agree with in a humble, jovial manner. Chesterton engaged in debate frequently. He did so with some of the most famous people of his time, including H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, and Hilaire Belloc. Even his debate opponents regarded him with the greatest respect and affection. The famous playwright George Bernard Shaw said, "The world is not thankful enough for Chesterton."
Chesterton was a paradox himself. This brilliant man usually had no idea where or when his next scheduled appointment was. In fact, his wife had to manage much of his life since he continually proved he couldn't do it himself. He did a majority of his writings in train stations since he somehow always managed to miss the train. In one famous story, Chesterton telegraphed his wife saying, "I'm at Market Harborough. Where ought I be?" She responded, "Home." He once said, "I'm not absent-minded. It is the presence of mind that makes me unaware of everything else." He approached life with humor. Once trying to exit his car door, he became wedged inside. With a grin on his face, he said, "I would have tried to exit the car sideways, but I have no sideways." The cape-wearing, sword-bearing, cigar-smoking 300-pound man left no subject serious. Even his apologetics, historical theory, and theological biography overflowed with humor.
Chesterton said, "Subject matters may seem dull as ditchwater," but added, "Naturalists with microscopes have told me that ditchwater teems with quiet fun." Although Chesterton was raised in the Church of England, he was quite fascinated with Roman Catholicism. Chesterton wrote that he believed in a personal God and in the Christian faith, but admired the spiritual discipline and responsibility of the Catholic Church. In 1922, he decided to visit Rome and converted to Catholicism. After this, he began writing books on denominational topics like Puritanism and the Reformation. He would also write on heroes of the faith like St. Francis of Assisi and St. Thomas Aquinas. His work on St. Thomas Aquinas is considered one of the premier works on the saint.
As the legend goes, Chesterton made his secretary check out numerous books on the saint from the library. When she returned with a stack of books, Chesterton opened the top book, thumbed through it, closed it, and then proceeded to dictate the book on St. Thomas. This book ended up being considered the best book ever written on the saint.
The French philosopher and historian Étienne Henry Gilson said, "Nothing short of genius can account for such an achievement." Chesterton was famous for pairing wit with a serious point and self-deprecation. His writings often contained great paradoxes for which he was famous. He saw paradoxes as supreme assertions of truth. It was his favorite ploy to articulate the nature of his subject. He once said, "The Bible tells us to love our neighbors, and also to love our enemies, probably because generally they are the same people." Chesterton used paradoxes to even address social issues. Chesterton's book, What's Wrong with the World, talked favorably about distributism, which divided landowners into smaller communities to attempt to bring about neighborliness. He thought it to be a counter to socialism and capitalism, which he felt reduced people to inhumane units. Critics often responded well to his writings, until they discovered the truth behind it.
Chesterton spent decades writing, debating, and teaching people about faith. By the 1930s, Chesterton was publishing his own magazine, and as radio shows began to grow in popularity, Chesterton broadcast a radio series. In his own unique style, he used parables and allegories to bring about understanding of social issues affecting Europe. In 1936, with his health in decline, he decided it was necessary to write an autobiography. The same year it was published, he passed away. He was 62 years old.
Upon his death, an outpouring of comments about his influence came from around the world. T.S. Eliot and H.G. Wells, both good friends of his, expressed their grief with his passing, and Pope Pius XI declared him a defender of the faith. Because of Chesterton's inspiration, Mahatma Gandhi nationalized India with a non-Western ambiance. George Orwell got the date 1984 from a novel of Chesterton's, and his apologetic works were pivotal in the conversion of C.S. Lewis. T.S. Eliot commented that Chesterton did more than any man in his time to maintain the existence of the Christian minority in the modern world. Over the course of his lifetime, he would author more than 4,000 articles, 100 books, and preach countless sermons. His writings were pivotal to the conversions of some of history's most influential apologists, and are considered foundational to argue against agnosticism and modern relativism.
Chesterton was able to see where modern relativism was headed. Now nearly 100 years or so since his writings, it's interesting to see how accurate he was about certain things. For instance, he rejected communism in the days before it became truly horrific. He wrote that socialism was an illusion controlled by a ruling few. He dejected Nietzsche's perpetuation of nihilism, claiming God was dead. He also stood opposed to materialism, scientific determinism, and moral relativism. Chesterton wrote for the common man because he loved common sense. He defended morality and ethics, but most importantly, he defended the Christian faith.